Morning, everybody. Foster here with Fridays with Foster, and I am actually I'm just kind of drinking this. I say the same old like it's not a uh, like it's inadequate, but it's totally adequate. I'm drinking that Papua New Guinea blend from Pete's still until the next, I guess, monthly order gets here. I don't know if I've been lax or if I've just been happy with enjoying some good coffee, so I'm not out searching. We'll figure it out. Anyway, oh man, that's good. So, so what are we going to talk about this morning? So I put something in the window uh, of the um, of the initial update about the title. Stop telling your old sad story. I think it's important to understand that I am not at all suggesting that first is the caveat. I guess I always do this. I don't want anybody to be mad at me or think that I'm uncaring or unfeeling. And anybody who truly knows me understands that's not that anything but the case. So, what I think is important is to note that I understand everybody has issues in their lives, relevant problems that need to be dealt with every day. Yeah, Brianna, I a friend gave this to me a while ago. Brianna, this is for those of you who aren't reading, so that there's a big cup of coffee this morning. Unless you're talking about you, are you talking about you? Because if you're talking about me, I was just thinking about switching to like one of my dainty little proper cups. But when I'm making the French press, I love the 16-ounce cup that I have, which is maybe good or bad. But anyway, I love it. Thank you. And what are you drinking this morning, Brianna? Hopefully you'll let us know. Comment on there. Um, so uh, everybody's problems, quality problems, there's still problems to be dealt with, right? That we need to deal with. And situations that happen in our lives, we don't always process at the same time as other people in the same way as other people. So in this way, I'm not suggesting that there's a comparison between issues you've gone through and issues other people have gone through and whether or not you should just be dealing with it or whatever that case might be. What I'm talking about are if you're watching this, hopefully you're a fairly intelligent person with some awareness in your life and you're really able to say, okay, there's this thing that I've been saying to myself for years about something that happened to me in my past, and it's a story that has been brought into my reality on a consistent basis in almost all my relationships, in everything I do. And for a lot of times, it's not whether or not someone knows this story about you, but how long until you tell them? Because you know you're going to tell them, because you tell everybody this story. And there's a context part of this, which is okay. Sharing parts of your story, I call it the old sad story, to show perseverance or growth or something like that is fine. And if you want to share something, a couple ideas in the box, I would love to hear them. But a lot of people just not that they even always share them, but we tell them to ourselves. And so we tell these stories to ourselves about who we used to be, who other people told us or convinced us we were, and those people might be long out of our lives, but we bring that story and that belief here today. The biggest problem that I have, if it's not something that somebody else told me at some point in my life, I make things up that are totally untrue, and then I believe them. And what I do is I actively engage in behaviors that support that. Um, I think that one thing, so I'm going to be a little bit harsh here, and I'm a little hard on myself too. That's fine. So I call this like amateur narcissism because narcissists pretty much it's more of a they think very highly of themselves above all others, but one thing that they do is they think about themselves often. The reason I call it amateur narcissism is because The amateur part of it is they think about themselves all the time, but they don't always think they're better. They think they're worse, right? I'll get into situations where I'll bring up old life stories and old life situations and think, oh, and that's why I can't do this, or that's why I'm in this situation today, or I that's why I have I have this quality in my life, or some kind of a behavioral idiosyncrasy that I operate with on a regular basis because of this, and it holds me back today, things of that nature. So the one couple terms I like, first, humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. Humility is thinking about yourself less. Thinking about others is where we get into humility. And I'll talk a little bit about that and granting us some perspective. When we gain perspective, there's a couple things that I put up here, and this is not at all a complete list, but some things that I think about. We gain perspective through first awareness, then detachment, we relate, and we reframe. I'm not going to say this is a four-step perspective gaining process, and nobody wants me to put that on the title of a video anyway. But these are some things that I see that we go through. So first is awareness, right? We have to have a certain amount of awareness that something's a little bit off about our perspective. There are certain ways I'm being held back, certain ways I'm holding myself back through my actions or inactions. The decisions that I'm making are not helping me achieve whatever my goal is. And there's a balance there. This is not about being driven 24/7 on every little thing that I come across in my life. Some of the things that are important in my life are much more strategic, and some things are lower level. And there are things that are very tactical. They are things that other people can handle, and if they don't come to fruition, it's not going to push us and our business off the path of success. So, first part, awareness. So I have to have that awareness. Second part is detaching. And it's actually interesting. So that the first part was something that I was listening to on a Jocko Willink, podcast that I was listening to, and he talks a lot about that competitive nature in not burning out. So the difference between strategy and tactics. And I actually had a client that I recently started working with, and she said, "Gosh, you know what? I love the idea. Everything we're talking about, I'm really excited about. I'm already tired, and I don't want to take on any more of these goals, right?" Well, part of what they were viewing were the goals were very tactical in nature, right? So they take a lot of work, focus from one tactical issue to another tactical issue to another tactical issue. And that's really hard to keep up with for any type of continuum. When we look at things strategically, it changes the situation, what we do. So that awareness, we have to see that something is off first before we look at how we reframe things in the end to a strategic sense. This is what I want to read to you. This is from Discipline Equals Freedom by Jocko. It's about detachment. Okay. Detach. One of the most powerful things you can do as a human being is learn to detach. Detach from your ego, detach from your emotion, detach from your perspective, detach from yourself. So, how do you detach? He said, first, recognize that you need to detach, right? When I'm getting emotional, when I'm getting upset about something, that I usually will, my perspective will be skewed. And anybody that knows me knows that, it happens often. It happens to me. I'm a fairly emotional guy, wearing my emotions on my sleeve. I try and be even keel. Doesn't always work out exactly as I plan, but nonetheless. So recognize you need to detach. So while it is a force that can drive you to success, right? That emotion and moving forward, having that ego driving you, it can be a trap. If it gets out of control, it can drive you crazy. You must detach from your ego. Recognize that emotions lead to bad decisions and bad behavior. You must detach from your emotions. Recognize you must detach from your perspective. Sure, perspective is important, but once you see it, you have seen it. To continue to look at something from the same perspective doesn't advance your knowledge. You must detach from your perspective. And he goes into this a little bit more. I think it's important to note that having a certain awareness is the first part of it, but making a decision, the next step is to detach from it and making a decision to say, this is the right time, this is the right situation. Before moving forward, I need to detach. When we are acting strategically in our thought process and in our businesses and our lives, we understand the benefit of perspective, of not getting too emotionally involved in the situation while still being emotionally engaged in what's happening. We can detach from the situation for a moment and see what's happening. Okay, so then we go to the next part, which is relate. Relate is all about, in my experience, learning about other people's situations, right? If we look at some of the quote sad stories that a lot of people have heard about, so Bill Gates, he dropped out of Harvard. The first business he started failed. Charlize Theron witnessed her mother kill her father. Oprah Winfrey, she was raped at 9, got pregnant at 14, and her infant son died. Viktor Frankl spent 3 years in a concentration camps before writing Man's Search for Meaning. Um, I'm not okay. I'm not putting myself on this list, but I got kicked out of the first college I went to. I went to Syracuse University, 1993. I think I was kind of following my cousin's lead. I wanted to get out of town. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, and Syracuse was whatever 5.5 hour drive, 5 hour drive down the thruway, 4 hours. And I just, I had a really great time learning about life. Did not learn a lot about school and education and how to learn. And it took me 6 years to graduate from college, which is that funny line from Tommy Boy when he says a lot of people, take 7 years, I think he says to graduate. He said, yeah, they're called doctors. I'm not a doctor, but it's okay. So that was a sad story that I've still told up to this day as in my mind that is a negative for me. It's something that's held me back, something that I wish I was different, right? Abandon all hopes of having a better past or a different past in your storytelling. It is what it is. How I use that information is what's important today. When I can relate to people in their stories, in their struggles, when I talk to people about what's going on with me, there may be people that watch this and say, well, you know what, I have that same experience. Interestingly enough, well, I'll take a sip of coffee first. I'm going to call my dad out. Love you, Dad. Funny, I remember going to visit colleges with my sister, who's about 2.5 years older than me, 3 years in school. And we were going to these universities. I think we were at, might have been at UVA. Um, anyway, so we're at the bookstore and my dad is there. I love you, buddy. He's talking to one of the kids working in the bookstore and telling him his story a little bit and say, well, because my dad started at UVA, got a full football scholarship, and he ended up leaving and transferring to University of Pittsburgh and actually completed a education night school while working. Took classes at Harvard Business School after that, and uh, in my opinion, one of the most successful guys I know in many different areas of his life, not just business. But I remember him talking to one of the kids in the bookstore saying, oh, don't do what I did. And he was just telling him, rolling out his whole story and relating that to somebody else. And he looks at me, and I did the same thing. Needless to say, I didn't get a full football scholarship to Syracuse University, but um, I did not live up to my potential, right? The expectations that I had, I didn't really have any plans. My plans were to no longer be in high school, to get accepted, right? To do well enough to get accepted into Syracuse University, which is what it was. I got into their marketing program there, joined a fraternity. I was in Sigma Chi, kind of. I partied off campus for the majority of the time that I was there. Wasn't really involved in the fraternity after I pledged. That was something that bothered me for years. I was never close with a lot of my fraternity brothers after the fact, even guys in my pledge class, because my college experience, I more so passed through. I didn't really attend college. I kind of passed through. Graduated from University of Pittsburgh with honors ultimately, 2 years after I spent 4 years at Syracuse. But that was a story that I told myself, which is why I'm not this. That is why I'm not that. Why I haven't done this, why I can't do that. It was this insidious tape that just when things are going well and I think I'm doing okay, uh, I think it's the ego. And I don't mean ego as in the built up part. I mean, the ego is that little voice inside that wants to always be heard, that knocks on the door and then pushes play, plays that tape. Oh, don't forget, you know, you didn't graduate from your first university with honors and go to law school. That was my idea. My goal, if I had a goal in my mind, though I had no plan to get there, was to I initially wanted to go to UVA and graduate from UVA law and go to law school. And that voice comes back in all the time and tells that sad story, right? I don't share that with a lot of people because I don't know, might be embarrassment, might be I don't really have a problem with it. Obviously, I'm telling it on here on this, but the thing is that I tell myself that story all the time. Okay. What I like to think about is the idea that adversity is the touchstone of growth in these situations. And that great line about the caterpillar, so just when the caterpillar thought its life was over, it emerged a butterfly. So when we relate to each other, like I just did to you about my situations, or more than happy to reach out to me and talk more about this, or I'm happy to talk to you offline about anything that you've got going on that you want to share, then we actually have that relational aspect of this. So we can relate to each other. My dad related to the kid in the bookstore. My dad related to me. Unfortunately, I had to find my own path, but wasn't much my own path. It was very similar to his. So we get to the last part, reframe. Most people stop, well, at uh, the awareness or, maybe detachment if they can. The relational part is something that usually takes some help from the outside. Somebody that can come to you and say, no, this is my story, this is my situation. And you can relate to them and what they're doing. Um, but there's also situations where maybe you actually reach out and you are focused on how you can relate to other people, asking people their story. That's probably one of the best ways to really engage and relate is not just go around, talking, talking, talking. When I'm talking, I'm not learning anything. As much as I love these Fridays with Foster, I'm really looking forward to starting some interviews because when I ask other people questions about themselves, that's when I learn more, not when I hear myself speak. I don't really, actually, not at all. I don't go back and watch these. Maybe I should. I figure so. There's a big problem that my wife or my marketing person will be like, "Hey, Foster, we got to take a look at how you're doing, what you're doing, or you're drinking too much coffee, or you're talking too fast, you're saying all the time, whatever that is." I might take a look at that. But when I'm asking people questions, I have to remain open to what their response is because I don't really know what their response is going to be. When I'm telling my story again and again and again, I only hear my story. So get to the reframing part, probably the most important aspect of it. How do I reframe that story to actually work for me today? First, to be freed from it of a failure story. Second, to use that to move forward. So in my situation, which is something I'm continuing to work on, thinking I was supposed to be on a different path than I was on when I went to Syracuse University is probably where I get caught up in that reframing challenge. In thinking that the time was wasted is important to note because if I think the time is wasted, I can't grow from that. It's always going to be a void in my life. Uh, And so, if we can look back on our situation and accept it for what it is outside of our judgment, was that time that I learned a lot about life. I learned a lot about myself. I persevered um, and ended up graduating from the University of Pittsburgh with honors, which I kind of always looked like as a bit of a failure. Well, if I had started at Pitt, I'd had one school and, maybe I could have done better. Where, I think it was a good accomplishment for me to have graduated cum laude from Pitt, despite the fact that I had those, 6 years prior of challenge at Syracuse. So reframing is to state that there is a bigger purpose and a different purpose for this story that can be used to help others, that can be used to further my efforts in my life, business and personal and otherwise, I need to try and see where that story represents the best parts of me. As I already mentioned, perseverance is one. I didn't have to go back to school at all. I could have just completely dropped out, but I stuck with it. Second, when I did go to Pitt, one of the things that was great is I started taking, well, some classes, some elective classes I hadn't taken before, like art history, which I realized I absolutely loved. Don't use it today specifically, but absolutely loved it. What I really loved that I started doing at Pitt was started dealing with communications, small group communications, and interpersonal communications. We had a wonderful class where literally the professor walked in and he said, okay, the object of this class is to determine the object of this class. Go. And we could ask almost no question, or he would hardly answer any of our questions about it. And it was a really interesting exploration into group dynamics, interpersonal communication. I would have never had that opportunity otherwise. And I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about myself because I grew up in a family that he who talks loudest wins. And I learned how to talk very loud and right, wrong, or indifferent. I was going to back my play. And that didn't work in this situation. So I, for the first time, learned to sit back and observe, right? That part of my experience benefits me today as a business coach. I think it benefits me as a human to actually sit back and listen and observe what's going on with people to see how I can best be of service in different situations. And it gives me the opportunity to confide in others like I hadn't been able to before. So, based on those experiences, I don't tell myself that story as a sad, old, broken story of somebody who screwed up and can never get that part of their history back again. So they're doomed, doomed. That is not my story today. My story today is I have a wonderful opportunity and a real chance to have a second go around in a situation that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I can also, like my father did with me and the kid in UVA and other various bookstores around the country that we visited, that my dad was able to relate his story to them. And it's okay. I relate my story here because it's okay. Doesn't make me any less than, makes me different, but we're all different in our own ways. But I'm not letting that old, sad story prevent me from doing the things that I need to do to achieve my goals today. That's what I want you to think about when you start thinking about that old sad story. The humility for me is thinking of other people more and thinking of myself less. And again, the way I gain perspective is through awareness, detachment, relating, and reframing my situation. So, if you have any other things that you want to talk about with Foster, have suggestions for coffee, I'm always up for that. Really appreciate you taking the time to work on yourself today. Hope you have a wonderful day and thanks for your time.